business models like Airbnb and Uber with, and steer some of that to address all of those challenges. We know from what happens in social enterprise that it's possible. What we haven't found is the way to scale it. That's one of the things we're looking at in Amey when we deliver services. We know we have that information, and we're often working with customers who are bound by things like the Social Value Act, so it creates levers for us to work in this way. I don't personally think those levers are anywhere near strong enough yet, and we need to look at how we can create new ones. And just to finish off, the reason I think this is so important is we live in a world of exponential speed of technology development. So if Airbnb were enabled by this thing, this is the most accessible user interface in history until that came along. The picture on the right was recreated from the outputs of an MRI scanner, within which a person was wearing a pair of video goggles watching the film on the left. So this is literally mind-reading, moving images using technology, and it was first done 3 years ago. That disruption is going to hit us in spades in 4 or 5 years' time, I think. I hope that was interesting. Thanks very much for listening.
Now, there is a challenge as CIOs. Where do you reach out to get involved and learn from that? Because it's a superb flow, and I've seen elements of this. You've opened up a tremendous amount more from your work and your colleagues' speech the other day to the CIO forum. Observations, comments, questions from the floor. And don't all volunteer to go and work for Amey. Anybody like to raise a question or follow through that, or raise their own experiences of seeing this new world?
To what extent do you
Can you identify yourself?
Sorry, Louise Harrington, LB. To what extent do you think companies should be taking into consideration social impacts of what they're doing and working to deliver products and services that actually further our society more than just an insurance?
Yeah. So I think the obvious answer is a long-term healthy society and economy is a good place to do business. Absolutely. I think the real challenge is how you turn that into more immediate practical measures, and I'm not going to claim to have the answer to that. I think that principle that we try to carry out in the Alliance of large organisations making themselves more accessible to small organisations is a really important part of it. But I think the reason that we need to think about policies for it is that private sector organisations are largely driven by the markets. You get some that have far-looking leaders or whose business models are long-term, like Amey's are, which encourage them to think more in the way that I've just described. But the reality is behaviour is driven by millions of day-to-day decision makings, and Volkswagen just gives you an idea of how quickly that can go wrong. So I think those abstract principles are not enough. We need to find different ways of measuring things. So I find it interesting, for example, that Michael Porter, who created the famous four forces then five forces model of business that's taught everywhere, is spending his time now working on something called the Social Progress Index, which is promoting as an alternative to GDP. So it's not just crazy people like me thinking this stuff. It's fairly serious people. But that's as best an answer as I can give, I'm afraid.
Just picking up your point, you find in Amey, in other companies that you're aware of, that the very much younger generation that's coming in to be recruited from universities, from college, social media, active, aware, are more interested in reaching out and being involved in these things than maybe their predecessors a few generations back were.
I think so, yeah. I certainly see it in graduates that come to work in Amey. I also think that all of those technologies behind Airbnb that I described, the director of Idea Lab at University College London put it really well to me recently. He said 10 years ago, the only thing we tried to do to help a new business get off the ground was help them write a better business plan they could take to the bank to get a loan. Now we do hundreds of different things because there's 100 different ways to start a business, and most of them you can do free. And one of the things that has led to is an enormous explosion in young social entrepreneurs working in collaborative workspaces. So ideas like the ones I've been showing, that they're just everywhere being driven by these people, actually rather a large number of them who have no interest in a typical corporate career, who have serial entrepreneurial projects on the go, many of which have this sort of characteristic.
So how many of your young staff, unbeknownst to you, are moonlighting in the evening, the weekend, being entrepreneurs and getting a business off the ground or taking a good salary from it? Perhaps. Further questions, observations? Can you identify yourself again, please?
In Dudley from Nelson's. A lot of what was on there seemed quite viral and how it's coming together and sort of random and guerrilla. To genuinely get scale, will there need to be standards, or would that kill it?
I think yes, there need to be standards. We need to be very careful what those standards are. So I think we need to develop standards between the public sector and the private sector for the data about publicly funded infrastructure that should be made openly available so that people can innovate from it. So as a for example, take answering that food challenge. How would you redistribute food with no extra money? Well, if there was a requirement on public service providers like Amey to make available as open data information about spare capacity in the vehicles that we drive around cities every day, now you've got a resource you might be able to do something with. Now, I don't know whether that's the answer or not. What I do believe there is a need for dialogue between the public and private sector to establish what data should be made openly available versus what data we couldn't make openly available because it would give away the secrets to our competitive business model. So somewhere between those two pressures there's a happy medium, and I think finding a standard for that so that innovators everywhere could come up with something that works in one place and then replicate it elsewhere because they know the same data and resources will be available. That would be really useful. And that's why I find Kelvin Campbell's work so exciting. He's currently collating evidence about these approaches that work and what are the policies, the infrastructure, the other features that make them work, so that you could take that and turn it into a broader corpus of knowledge and perhaps to start influencing policy.
Can you identify yourself, please?
Yes, I can. Yes, I'm Neil Wood-Dutton. Hello.
No.
I think I might have you before.
We have. I can't remember where. You're right.
But I'm wondering whether, because in a way that you're in a very privileged position, I suppose. But I wonder, is there something transferable from your experience to the broader community about a component of a digital strategy, which seems to be on everyone's minds, which is about open data and APIs?
Yes.
I see a lot of people thinking about the customer experience and about mobile apps and about this and that and agile development and fail fast.
Yeah.
But a lot of what you're building on is this idea, I guess, that information is an asset that can be shared in other ways, maybe to your value. Is there a broader message for the broader community about making that like a first-class citizen in a strategy? I don't know.
I certainly think there's something in that. So in the second machine age, the book that I mentioned before, they talk about an idea called recombinant innovation. The idea that there are so many new ideas around at the moment, and that the secret is to find the value of combining them in the right way. There's far too many ideas to explore systematically. And if you look back to Clayton Christensen's work on disruptive innovation, actually large organisations are bad at finding the right ones for very good reasons, whereas small new organisations are much better at finding them. So I think that wider principle of open innovation, which is something that Unilever have been challenging for years, that I've seen Barclays talking about at a very senior level recently, Empower starting to do it with a new innovation centre in Solihull. So I think that idea of recognising that this highly connected world creates new ideas so quickly that the real value is finding how to combine them into new ideas, and that traditional organisations are going to be very inefficient at doing that, particularly at finding the highly disruptive models that do to the accommodation business what Airbnb is just doing. And I think that applies across the board. So, I've seen business models like this in model railway, in farming. There's something called Pasture Scout that matches farmers who've got cattle that need fields to graze in with other farmers who've got spare fields. So wherever you look, you can find it, and it's certainly encroaching on our business model. I don't think anywhere is immune from these effects.
Other observations? Just a brief observation there, a very small thing in London where I live, in Islington. We discovered a little while back that all the buses tend to go on the major axes, because that's where the bus routes done. And there's one bus, 294, that does a zigzag cross country from Islington to Thomaton, which was created by a trust to allow the mums in the tower blocks to get to the schools and Thomaton Hospital with their kids.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, by sheer coincidence, it also zigzags past a whole mass of small arts institutions, artists-run spaces, little galleries, things like that. So de facto, it's become an arts bus, as well as a mums for the kids and London Hospital bus.
Yeah.
And no one saw that connection in advance. it's just emerged as a reality because people have only connected, So
Absolutely.
how many people here live in the heart of urban area? And how many people live in beautiful, quiet, rural villages and small towns across the road from the pub? Yes, of course. Smart villages and smart pubs, perhaps, or maybe the battle of how you keep the local pub alive in a town with a declining population. Any other observations or questions? Yes. Can you identify yourself for TfL?
I'm Tina from TfL. I was just wondering whether anybody, this is completely unrelated to TfL, but whether anybody had approached you about the subject of housing in London and the way that the current problem of social housing can be resolved. Because there must be an innovative way, by the sound of things, that you can mobilise a set of people to come up with some sort of solution that most of our politicians seem to be lacking.
Yeah, that's partly what Eastwick and Sweetwater is about actually. So a lot of that is about affordable housing, and for IBM last year, I wrote some of the ideas for how technology might be used in that arena to address some of those issues for the what turned into a winning proposition, which is now being delivered by a company that's a competitor of who I now work for. So shot myself in the foot there. But so yes, that's one answer, and we're also looking at it in army basis because we look after a huge number of army houses. I think more broadly, I did know London Borough of Newham were working with Foster and Partners a few years ago, looking at some ideas in that space. So I think a lot of people are looking at it. I don't think that the business model yet is fully established. That's why I mentioned the piece of work on planning frameworks. There's something like £14 billion spent on new build property every year in the UK. If you take a tiny fraction of that using the right planning guidelines and divert it into technology, you can do it. Currently it's crazy. The Longbridge redevelopment, for example, the whole thing is being built without any forward connectivity infrastructure because EU law states it can only go in there through commercial providers once the businesses move in and there's demand there for it. We've just got to fix things like that. I know the government's doing a lot to fix broadband at the moment, but I think that gives you an example of how far behind technology policy is at the moment.
TfL, in fact, announced yesterday, or the day before, that it is developing a plan to implement 10,000 new housing on TfL sites around. So you're going to become big affordable housing developers in London.
Possibly. But I think that's actually also getting the coffers in for TfL, so there's a double-edged sort of thing.
Yes, it's to raise funding for TfL from the
It's not just totally around the social side of housing. But yeah, at least we're doing something.
I think that sort of issue is why I focused on food as well. I didn't mention it on the slide, but I'm sure these things will be available. There's a link on the slide with the kebab shops on to a TED video by a guy called Ron Finley, who was the world's first guerrilla gardener. He lives in south central Los Angeles. It's a brilliant video, but he starts off by pointing out it's a 40-minute drive from where he lives to the nearest shop that sells fresh food. And then he shows you pictures of fast food joints, drive-by dialysis clinics, just astonishing things. But that's not unusual. That's true of places like Glasgow. So, you know, food is rarely focused on in the smart cities debate because it's just too big an issue to get to grips with, but it touches absolutely every element of it. I think food and diet are a big part of the whole housing and, you know, areas of sustained deprivation challenge as well.
We need to finish there, but I think that's been a very good presentation and a good debate. So thank you very much for taking part.
Thank you, and thank you, Richard. Thank you.